I'm a big fan of redemption. I like it as a concept, especially a literary concept. And for my money, the guy who's working best with redemption is George R.R. Martin. If, with obviously Game of Thrones coming back on Sunday, everybody's hyped about that. But as somebody who actually read the novels before the TV series even came out, one of the most amazing things that he does is he takes a character and black and white, you hate this character immediately. He does something that's so awful that you hate him or her. And then over the course of the novels, he goes from you hating this character to you understanding the character's motivations to you being sympathetic to the character. And then suddenly by the 5th book, you're rooting for this character. He's now your favorite. And George R.R. Martin does it better than anybody. And he does the same thing. He does it in reverse, too. He makes characters who you like right away and makes them slowly get worse, which is a really, really hard thing to do for writers. I like the redemption quality of it, though, because I think, it's probably just a reflection of society at this time, but I think we need more redeeming in this world than ever before. I was watching New Amsterdam last night, and it's a very much a Mary Sue show. I mean, all the characters are too good for their own good. But man, I feel good at the end of every episode. It's like, God, somebody's trying. Thank you. I guess the idea of redemption is really important to me as a concept in stories. For me, a lot of my post-apocalyptic story is the idea that for some reason human beings just don't stop, and when we should. I'm amazed that people ever traveled the oceans. Somebody got in a boat and said, I'm going to see what's beyond the nothing, and they did it, and it worked. And people lived in northern Wisconsin and northern Minnesota in the 1800s in cabins half the size of this table, and didn't die. And that's amazing to me. They got to a point now where we are so soft that we complain about our phones not being fast enough. They're downloading messages from space, people. But that's how much we've taken for granted. And the fact is that back in the day, people had far less reason to keep going, and yet they still did. So there's a very, very important redemptive quality to humanity, and I like that a lot.
I'm all about the paybacks. For 40 plus years, I've worked in a career where you always have to have your game face on. You always have to be pleasant and sociable and professional, and I've seen a definite change in the way people in our field are treated over the years. And so it gets to the point where you do kind of start thinking about the things that you really want to say. And I've already told my coworkers, wait till my last day at work, because I'm going to say all the things to all those patients who have been nasty and mean to me that I never could say before. I was driving to work one day and had I was on the interstate, a guy is just on my butt. I'm doing, the speed limit's 70 and I'm doing 80, and the guy is on my butt, and I'm trying to pass a line of semis, and he's flashing his lights at me and riding on my butt, and it just irritated the crap out of me. I got ahead of the trucks, I pulled over, I slowed down, he goes whizzing past, and there was a cop right up the road. It's like, how often does that happen? It's like instant karma, and it just made my day. It totally made my day. So I really am kind of about the paybacks, I think. But I think that Sean makes a good point. I think all human beings are complex characters. We're not all really, really good or really, really bad. We're all a mix. We've all done things that we're not exactly proud of. We all probably have some things we'd like to redeem ourselves on. We all have thoughts of revenge and retribution, I'm sure. And I think that my most recent book, Dead of Winter, is actually about a subject matter that's kind of near and dear to me, and it's something that's becoming a big problem in our society, and that's human trafficking. And the story is about two girls, basically two sisters, who both get caught up in human trafficking ring. One of them shows up in the ER dead, and that's how the story starts. But before she dies, she lets the staff know that the man that brought her in, who then quickly disappeared, also has her sister. And so the story there is about, not only there's some revenge issues. I mean, the father of these two girls whose wife died before all this happened is all about wanting to know who took his daughters and can he have a few moments alone with them. That's what he wants to ask the police. Certainly revenge is on his mind. And then redemption, I think just trying to find this other girl, not being there in time to save the first one, but trying to solve a crime in time to save the second one. I think that theme flows through the books, any kind of book that's involving crimes and mysteries and death and evil and good and all that. You're going to have a mix of those things, and it's a complex issue, but one that I think is kind of fun to play with and explore a little bit. So.
Well, in these books, there's a difference between mysteries and thrillers, which I didn't know until recently. In thrillers, and a lot of books are a mix, so these are not hard, fast rules. But in thrillers, you kind of know who the bad person is pretty early on, and then it's trying to foil that person, and that's a form of revenge a lot in this genre. In mysteries, there's somebody's missing or there's a dead body, and you're trying to figure it out. So I think in my books, this series is mysteries, the revenge is often a motivating factor for suspects. And in my books, and I agree with Sean and Beth that characters are not black and white; they're complex. There's no these are not whitewashed characters, good or bad. And so getting into the little, and that's the human part again, those little motivating factors that may cause somebody to commit a crime, somebody who's not an arch villain. I'm not as interested in, and I'm always afraid to say this, but in case there's one in the room, but I don't like serial killers. I don't like killing machines. I don't find them very interesting. But if you are one, don't kill me because of it. And I'm much more interested in what can motivate any person to go over the line. The redemption part of my books are really with my main character Nils. He is not a stereotypical dark, heavy drinking, tragic private detective like 2 drinks and he gets tired. But he does have issues in his life, and he's trying to be a more modern man, an emotionally intelligent person, and it because he accepts his responsibility in relationships gone bad and things like that. He's trying to grow beyond that, and that's where I think the redemption in my books come from.
Want to add one last comment. Being a writer is kind of fun because if there's somebody that you really, really don't like or you want to pay back for, you can just sort of create them as a thinly disguised character in your book and then do whatever you want to them.
Well, I think it's a good lead into one of the questions is what's the hardest part about writing or creating the villain versus the hero in the story?
The hardest part about creating a villain versus a hero? For me, it's all the tears I cry. Just trying to get the thing done. No, I guess, a lot of what Matt says, one-dimensional villains are the worst, with the possible exception of the Joker from Batman, who is the greatest one-dimensional villain of all time. But every other villain and by the way, that Joaquin Phoenix Joker movie that's coming out, I'm really disappointed about that because he doesn't need a backstory. He's just a bad guy. Let him be bad. But yeah, every other Batman villain, they've got these great stories. Or if you watched, the last Spider-Man Far From Home or Spider-Man Homecoming movie, the Vulture in that. Here's a guy who spent a ton of money and had guys to put to work, and then Tony Stark came and took all the contracts away from him and didn't care. That's the best reason I've ever heard to become a supervillain. So you have to give them a motivation that's not just turning them into the Terminator. There has to be something in them that you as a writer and you as a reader can actually sympathize with, and you can go, oh yeah, I get it. That's what makes really good villains. And at the same time, the whole concept of the Mary Sue trope in literature, where somebody's just always does the right thing. Nancy Drew, the Hardy Boys, those are the ultimate Mary Sues. They're so boring. They're so boring. You need somebody who fails a lot, and I think failure endears us to a character because I fail a lot. I understand failure. Anybody who does things right the first time, I have no common ground with them. I have nothing to say to them.
You think Nancy Drew is boring? I don't like you anymore.
I didn't say she's boring. I just said everything she does is boring.
You're no longer my friend. I do.
She should note, though, I literally have read hundreds of Nancy Drew and Hardy Boys books at this point in my
He's
life.
trying to redeem himself. See,
I've read them. I've been
redemption.
there.
Yeah.
Number 13, The Twisted Claw, favorite one.
The retribution's coming. Speaking of which, I actually I work with somebody who makes unique coffee cups and water bottles with different designs and glitter and stuff on them. They're really quite phenomenal. And she made me a coffee cup for work that says, "Be careful, or you'll end up in my novel." So, which is, I thought, kind of an apt phrase. I do think that creating characters is one of the most fun parts of writing, and I think everybody's complex. They're not one-dimensional, and if they are, they would be boring. And I think it's easier to create the bad people, and I don't know why that is. Maybe it's because I'm a bad person, and I can relate better to them. I don't know, but I do find it's a little more fun and a little more easier to do the bad people than it is the good people. But I always like looking at all the different angles and aspects of people. This person is good, but what's their kryptonite, and what do they do that's not quite so good, and what are they ashamed of? And same thing with the bad guys. What's their soft spot? How do you get to their heart? Because they do have one. And I think character development is what really makes a story interesting to most people. You can have great plots and thrillers and suspense, but basically it's the people. If you don't care about the people, you're not going to enjoy the story. And so I think character development is probably the most important part of writing any kind of fiction. And I'm just going to keep on creating fun bad people, I guess. I think all characters as writers, too, have a little bit of the author in them. So, there's certain evil people that maybe have a trait in them that I also have. I'm not going to tell you which ones, but same thing with the good people. They have some good things and some bad things. And there's a little bit of me, I think, in every character that I create. So.
I agree with that. There's a little bit of an author in each character. I think the hardest part about villains is making their motivation credible, because they have to do something horrible enough to write a story about and make it interesting to read. And if you're not writing supervillains and there are people who have just tipped over the line, making that motivation credible is the hardest thing. And it's, to reference something that more people have seen than in my books, like in Fargo, when the Bill Macy character had money problem. I hope I'm not spoiling. Has everybody seen Fargo that came out 20 years ago? All right. Don't say spoiler alert. To make this car dealer, regular Joe, have some money problems, so he thinks he can solve it by paying some guys to kidnap his wife and then get the ransom. What is it? Which is a completely credible, believable thing in that story. But that's the kind of thing you're looking for. Somebody thinks, oh, I'll just cut a corner. I'll just take a shortcut and then everything will be better again. Or what is their shame in their life, like you mentioned. Finding that thing that would motivate one person to take another person's life or do something that leads to another person dying is the hard part.
Well, I have a technical question. So with your books, when you're writing it, before you're writing it, do you have the ending mapped out? Are you ever surprised while you're writing? Does it turn out differently? Or do you ever just start writing and see what happens?
I've done both. I used to be very much anti-outline because I read a book once and Stephen King said he didn't use outlines, and so, gosh darn it, I'm not going to use them either. And then what I found was I didn't finish a lot of books because I'd get to a point and I'd be like, I got nothing, and then it would just go away. So now I do tend to think through the books to a large degree. I have a beginning, a middle, and an end, but I'm not 100% gelatinized on what those three things are going to be exactly. I know he has to get from here to here to here, and then at the end, this is going to happen. But there's plenty of room for other things to happen too. I'm not very hardcore about an outline, but I find that they do help you write faster, if nothing else.
I get paid for outlines now. I can get money just for writing an outline for the book, so I've learned how to do them. Money's a great motivator. Fortunately, the outlines that I write in the beginning, my final products always vary from that outline, even in who the actual killer in the book is. And my publishers have always been pretty accepting of that. And I find that in my head, something in my brain knows where I'm going with the book, because even though I'll have an outline that says this person is the killer, and I'm writing the story, and I'm laying down my clues and having things point to that person, and I get to a certain point and realize, wait a minute, it's not that person, it's this person. That's so much better. And then I go back to the beginning and I go to try to put in some clues to be fair about that, and I find that they're already there. The clues are there. So something in my subconscious knew all along who the killer was. I'd make a great cop. I just didn't realize it until I got to a certain point. But I do think that having an outline, like you said, is helpful, because you get that beginning, middle, and end kind of plotted out for you. And there are times, particularly in the middle of a book, where you just go, God, I don't know what to do with this anymore. And then there's some nice shiny object over here with a new idea for a new book. And it's so easy to set that old one aside and then start a new book. And you end up with a whole bunch of unfinished books because the ideas are fun and exciting and new, and you want to go off with that. And you get into a middle of a book and it's boring and it's drudgery and it's work at that point. So it's helpful for me now to have the outline. And by outline, I don't mean an actual, like those high school week things we used to do with the ones and the Roman numerals and the letters and all that crap. It's basically just a 3 to 5 page, usually, synopsis of the story, who the main characters are, what the main plot is, who the dead person is, who killed them, how it gets solved, any little subplots. And that's what I give to my publishers, and then they pay me money for that. So it's actually a pretty good system. I find that it does help me write the books, because I do get stuck a lot of times. Then I have to go find the outline, dig it out, and say, all right, where did I mean to go with this? And it's like, oh, yeah, right, now I remember. So to me, it's helpful to do it that way, and I don't feel locked into it. So
I don't outline. There's pluses and minuses. There's no right way to do it. It's whatever works for the author. And to answer your questions, I'm constantly surprised. One of the fun things about not outlining is that you like, it's like reading a book. It's like, hey, I wonder what's going to happen next. Only you have to think of it. But I could go on I could talk about this for hours, so I won't bore you. First of all, I've worked on about 500 episodes of TV, so I haven't written all 500, but I've been part of the writing of 500, taking it from concept to outline to first draft, second draft, seeing it rehearsed on the stage and then shot. The one thing, so I've developed a sense of story just from seeing it so much. The other thing is that we have to write outlines in television because everybody has to be on the same page, studios and networks, and they almost always change. All these people sign off on an outline or give notes on an outline to get it to the place where, okay, this is great. And then you write the script exactly the way the outline said it would be, and everybody says, this is terrible. So something gets lost in the outline process. So when you don't outline, you get stuck. You have terrible days, sometimes a terrible week. But I find that the solutions to being stuck become more inventive than if you just put it all up on a whiteboard or however you happen to outline. But it's really a personal preference thing. And who is your publisher? Because I don't want to have a publisher that makes me write an outline. Okay, I won't go with them. Um, fortunately, my publisher has not asked for them yet. All right.
I don't have to write them, but they pay me to write them. So
As I say, by the way, this is a dangerous question to ask too, because if you ever thought about writing a book and you want to know if you could like actually write a book, just go hang out with a couple of authors who are talking about technique, and if you make it more than 15 minutes into that conversation without falling asleep, you might have what it takes. Might.
So my question has to do with sort of trends in writing and specifically the mystery genre. But if you aren't in the mystery genre, you can talk more generally. But sort of the trends that you're seeing amongst your fellow authors.
I really love the mystery genre. When I was a kid, I got to stay up past my bedtime on Thursday nights and only Thursday nights to watch Mystery on PBS. And so I have been long addicted to mystery novels. And that's really, my entire family read mystery novels when I was growing up. You know, my father insisted I read Conan Doyle and Agatha Christie and Edgar Allan Poe and all that jazz. So I grew up on mystery novels, and I've been trying to write a mystery novel for years. Hasn't been working for me, but I keep trying. As far as trends that I see, my biggest problem is that I see a lot of people chasing trends and not a lot of people setting trends. Because what happens is one book gets popular and then that's all they want. They want 30 more copies of that book. Harry Potter came out, and then every book series for like the next 5 years was some kid's name and a bunch of stuff. You know, Charlie Bone and 37 Things. And so like that became everything. And then Hunger Games got popular, and they were like, we want you to have children killing each other. Oh, jeez. So I see a lot of chasing trends, not a lot of setting trends. I'm really interested in stuff that's unique and new, and stuff that nobody else is really doing. Most of my favorite books are books that, you know, you say, when people say, oh, you like Lamb by Christopher Moore is one of my favorite books, and somebody said, well, what's that book like? The Bible meets Monty Python. I got no answer for you. Yeah, I like books like that. So when I see something trending, when I see something getting really popular, I tend to run away from it myself. So I'm probably not the best person to ask this question of.
I actually don't read other people's mysteries now that I write them, because I'm always a little leery of picking up somebody else's wordage or ideas or whatever. So I tend to shy away from mysteries. And mostly I do thrillers and suspense, which have some mystery components to them, but it is a little bit different structure and story. And then I also do some just oddball weird things. I just finished listening. I do almost all the books I do now. I do on Audibles. I don't really actually pick up a book and read it anymore, because if I'm sitting down long enough to hold a book, I feel like I should be writing. So it's kind of a guilt thing. So when I'm in my car or walking my dog at the dog park, I listen to books on tape. That ages me by saying that, but and I just finished reading one, in fact, that was hilarious. I'm going to pitch somebody's book who isn't here, but it was one of the funniest books I've ever read that a doc I worked with recommended, and it was called Let's Just Pretend That Didn't Happen. And it's narrated by the author, which is normally a big red flag for me. But honest to God, this woman, she was so funny, and I laughed out loud several times. I was at the dog park the other day walking, and my dog, we get up to the gates, the fenced area, and my dog takes a dump, and so I'm bent over and I'm picking up dog poop, and this really funny part of the book comes on, and I crack up laughing. So I'm like picking up poop and laughing my butt off, and some guy walks into the dog park and looks at me, and he's like, you know, okay, let's go the other way. So I really can't say what the trends are in the mystery genre, because all I know is what I'm writing. I know what my agents and editors are asking from me, but I don't actually read books in the mystery genre, which I know sounds terrible, but that's the way it is.
Because I started reading them so late, I do read them because I'm trying to catch up a little bit. And at least the other thing is the mystery writing community is the nicest group of people. They're so supportive, and we have these conventions 2 or 3 times a year, and most of them are fan and writing conventions. So you go meet these people, and they become your friends, and then you feel like you want to read them. So because they're now your friends. But anyway, there is a trend out there which I do not care for, which is the first person unreliable narrator. Gone Girl was the first big one of those. There was one last year, which a lot of people like, but it's not my thing, The Woman in the Window. And
Dennis Lehane did one a while ago, Shelter Island.
I love Dennis Lehane, but I have not read that
Yeah,
that one. And so a novel is an investment of your time, most of them. You know, like you're going to sit down and because you don't want to read a bad one. It takes some time and effort to read a novel. And so I find unreliable narrators, I just find it trickery on the author's part. And it's just a personal thing, but they're very popular, the unreliable narrator. So, and I will not participate in that trend. The unreliable narrator is someone who they're telling the story. Usually it's in present tense, not past tense. But they have a drinking issue or a drug problem, so they're not even sure of their own observations, and they don't know if they're crazy, or you as a reader think, well, this person might be crazy, and they're imagining all this stuff happening, and they don't really know. And so one of the great things about reading a book is when you read an author who, like, I trust this person to take me on this journey and deliver a good story for me. And then with the unreliable narrator, that doesn't exist. But people love things like Gone Girl. So, but anyway, it's a big trend, and it's not my favorite.
Yeah, I think we could open it up to audience questions now.
Audience questions? There's one right behind you, Kelly.
Would your English teachers have known you would have become writers when you were in high school?
Speaking for mine, they insisted. Because I was the kid who, I grew up on a farm in the middle of nowhere with nothing to do. And so if you gave me a 3 to 5 page writing assignment on Friday, you were getting about 70 pages on Monday. And I did that quite often because I'd get into the story that I was telling for, my creative writing class or my English classes. And I think most of my teachers from second grade on just assumed that would happen eventually.
I grew up with parents who moved around a lot because every time my dad got a promotion, it meant a move. And so I was the new kid in school a lot. And every time the teachers would assign something writing related, like an essay or a book report, I was like, yes! And that made me so popular with the other students. Not. So I did have one teacher in high school, Mr. Bundy. My sister, who's sitting over there, probably remembers because she had him too, who did tell me. He said, you've got the potential to be a writer. And I actually sent my first short story into Highlights magazine when I was 17 and still in high school. And that was back during the days of just snail mail alone. There was no such thing as email, and they still managed to get that rejection to me in a record time. But I did that because Mr. Bundy said, you could be a writer. And so I do thank him many times for giving me that little bit of a oomph and a push, because it meant a lot to me.
I think they would not be surprised. Everything I learned about writing, I learned in high school. I took AP English. I passed out of all my college level English, and I thought I was going to be a doctor, so I thought I didn't need it anymore. And I got very lucky and had one woman who taught journalism and kind of composition, and then my literature teacher, where we did a lot of expository writing. They were great. I got really lucky, and I think that a lot of times it's because I would procrastinate on papers, and so I'd have to come up with some wild, especially in expository for literature, like make some wild analogy to try to write a book report at the last minute, so just like BSing my way through those papers, I think, is where my creative writing came from. Yeah.
My book reports always had recommendations of how the book could have been better.
Any more, Paula?
Do you feel we should read these in any order particularly? I mean, is it, sometimes you really need to read the first one first? I mean, all of you. Sounds like they run.
Yeah, for mine, yeah, you'd be disappointed if you tried to pick it up in the middle. Yeah, it's they're 3 books, but it's one story.
My books are all written to be able to kind of stand on their own. The Maddie Winston series, the first one in the series, Working Stiff, there's only one copy of it here, which I actually brought myself tonight because it's currently out of print. You can read it on a e-reader. It's available as an e-book, but that is the first book in the series. But you could pick up any of these books, I think, and get a feel for the characters, the storyline, and I do write them so that they are standalones, but I think that you get a better feel for the characters and the development of the story if you start with the first one, obviously. So same thing with the other series. I think you could pick it up anywhere and read it, but the Allison Abbott series is a little more, there's kind of a carryover story in 3 of the books, so that one you probably would do much better to start with the first book rather than read them out of order. So.
Mine are also written to stand alone, and several people have told me they've read them out of order and haven't minded it at all. So it doesn't really matter. Yeah.
If you had a second choice on what kind of books you would write, what would it be?
International bestsellers. Does that go for everybody? Are we good on that one? No. Yeah, I've written a bunch of different books, and they're in all different genres. I initially, when I went to college, when I left high school, I initially went to UW Stout for a very pretentious-sounding major. It was graphic art and sequential illustration, which is a fancy way of saying I wanted to draw comic books. And I just, after 2 years at UW Stout, I went, I'm not good enough. I can't compete. So I changed majors to write comic books instead. So I've always wanted to write a comic book. Work for Marvel.
I don't really have another genre that I would write. I love suspense, thriller, mystery. I have to kind of roll all 3 of those into it, but I grew up reading those kind of books. I mean, I started out with the Mary Stuart Gothic romances, you know. I've been told that I could write a good romance novel because I do have one of my earlier books had a sex scene in it, and my agent said, have you ever considered writing romance? But I don't think that I would be interested in doing that. I do have a young adult sort of dystopian, apocalyptic book that I've started and set aside and never been able to finish, and I might continue to try to do something along those lines. But for the most part, I love the mystery, suspense, thriller genre. So.
Well, first of all, we do have a choice if we want to write a second genre. I have written. I got ahead. I think it's my combination of Midwestern work ethic and TV writer work ethic. Because in TV you have to deliver it on time because they're going to shoot it and put it on the air. So I got way ahead after my 3rd book. I had a year and a half to deliver my 4th. So I wrote historical fiction with a crime element that I'm very excited about. I'm going to take one more pass, but no one's seen it yet. I'm going to take one more pass before it goes out. But you know, I tend to like I said earlier, I tend to lean toward more literary types of things. So I don't know if I'm capable of writing that, but that's what I would do. Yeah.